Good evening and welcome to Good News on Entertainment. I'm Carley Boyette. I'm so happy you're tuning in tonight. A little later, I am so excited to introduce you to somewhat of a new music artist. Brooke Robertson has not only a beautiful voice, but a pretty remarkable testimony as well. But first tonight, I want to tell you about a really exciting way to celebrate the Christmas season with one of my favorite bands for King and Country. They have already had an amazing year with their hit movie Unsung Hero and a tour that followed. Well, now the award-winning brother duo, who is also known and loved for their Christmas music too, is heading back to the theaters. Along with a new live Christmas album that came out November 22nd called A Drummer Boy Christmas Live, they now have a Fathom theatrical concert event hitting theaters nationwide from December 5th through the 9th. Before we hear from Joel Smallbone tonight about this exciting new concert experience, let's go ahead and take a closer look at what to expect.
It's remarkable to think that a baby boy born in a stable, no prestige or privilege, no social media or social status, political campaigns or private airplanes, then yet he flipped the world on its head. He turned BC into AD. He's the most famous name around the globe, inspired the most read book ever written. He reconnected us to heaven, and in turn brought heaven down to earth. And now he offers us redemption, a fresh start, freedom, so that we can hold our heads high and march through this life knowing that we're never alone. That every woman and man, every girl and boy, to all of us who feel like we have nothing left to bring, nothing to give, that we can know that God is smiling at us, that He's loving us, that you are enough. So light up that Christmas tree, stand under the mistletoe, surround yourself with the ones that you love the most, and together let us celebrate the greatest news that this world has ever known.
Man, this has been quite the year, and you guys now are finishing it out with a big bang, I think.
You could say that again. It has been quite one of the most preposterous years that I have ever lived, and to finish it out, as you allude to, not only with this King Country Live tour, but then also and more so with this cinematic concert experience, going back into theaters for the second time, Carly, in a year. It's kind of preposterous, you know.
Yeah, so much so you guys even already announced, you're like, listen, we're going to take a kind of a break next year. But I
Right.
love that you're packing all that you can in here at the end of 2024. And I love this because, man, if people haven't been to one of your shows, I don't know what they're waiting for. But to see this, I think in a movie theater is going to be
Mm.
it's I want to say it's even better than a front row seat. It's almost, I want to know more about how you filmed this thing. It almost looks like you have drones in the middle of it. And
Yes,
we're like on stage with you. What is
we're
better
getting
than
into
that?
the nitty gritty here, because I love visuals. I love pairing visuals with music and music with visuals. And so you got to imagine this is just my bread and butter, what we've done here. So yes, you can always trust your CFO, because if something's not good, he's not seeing the dollar signs. And we actually played it for him, a sort of a screener for him and the team. And he went out and he said literally what you said. And that's why I was reminded. He said, this is better than going to the concert itself. Because in the concert, you're at one perspective, and sometimes half a football field away or whatever. And in this case, we took the film crew from our movie Unsung Hero, which is a great team, and we dropped them into the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas, with 12,000 folks in attendance. And we captured cinematically with cameras all over the place. We had cameras in the roof, as you mentioned. We had this techno crane that was like this robot zooming around the room. And we all, for the sake of capturing these incredibly nostalgic songs, capturing the Christmas story, capturing this concert in a way that we have never done before. And it truly is. I've obviously seen it because I directed it and I helped kind of piece it together. It's beautiful, Carley. And one of our great struggles with Christmas in general is we love Christmas tours. They're some of our favorite tours we get to do, but the season is so short. And so you'd announce 10 shows and, 2/3 of the country in Canada and the UK, they're all upset because it's like, well, you're not coming here. And in this
And that was
case,
me last year. I remember like, y'all I'm in the Tampa area. I'm like, where are you? And you can't be everywhere. But this is a
no,
way you can be everywhere.
we will be in driving distance of every American. We're going to the UK with it. We're going down to Australia and to New Zealand. And so it's literally Drummer Boy Christmas all over the world.
And I don't want to take away from going to concerts because there is something so special when you're worshiping and singing with other thousands of fans, right? Like
Right.
that's it feels like a piece of heaven, I think, when we go to these worship concerts that you guys certainly host. But
Right.
to see a concert on the big movie screen like this, you guys have just perfected so well what you've described, how that looks visually. So I think if
Mm.
anyone was going to do this to the top notch, it's you guys. This is what we want to see on the big screen.
Well, and you're so right. I mean, so much of this experience is about coming together. And while Luke and I won't be there in person, we have poured our heart and soul and everything into this piece. And also, one of the things I wrote at the top of the show is I said, like, hey, you sit, stand, sing, like this is your night. And so what I had is my vision is that these theaters have got these families and kids and everyone's singing these carols and raising their flashlight. There might be some disruption as well. There might be some grumpy patrons, but we wanted to create these sort of mini concert experiences in these movie theaters across the country as well.
Well, and what I love about what you guys have done so well over the years, as well as your music, and I believe this is going to do this as well, it crosses outside of the lines to where you can absolutely, just like Unsung Hero does, you can feel so confident and so good about bringing non-believers to a show and to a movie theater. And I think anytime we can do that, and this is it. What a great opportunity to celebrate Christmas and the real meaning of Christmas. And man, I just think this is an opportunity to reach non-believers.
Well, I love Christmas because it's romantic and it's Santa Claus and and at the heart of it, obviously the origin story is it's Jesus, and to be able to, and this is as you mentioned, it's a very spiritual show. We really opted to take these sort of the spiritual side, the redemptive side of Christmas, and really highlight that through Drummer Boy Christmas. This is all about, it's all about the Christmas story. And so I think this is a story for the world. It was never relegated to a people group. The whole design of Jesus coming to earth was for humanity. It was never for a bloodline. You didn't have to be born into a certain family. It was for the people. And so that's our heart, is, as you said, just kind of reach across the aisle, if you will, and invite everyone into this great narrative.
Hey, well, I have you on the line here. I did not get a chance to talk with you during Unsung Hero. I talked with Candace and so many of the other
Mhm.
people, but now that we're kind of on the other side of it, I'm just so eager. What has this year taught you? And man, I'd
Mm,
imagine the shows that you put on then afterwards, after people really got to dive in deep and hear more about your story, I'd imagine they hit a
right.
little differently for you and your family as well when you got to meet fans and continued to tour afterwards. I mean, I'd imagine
Yeah.
this year, probably out of most, is going to be probably life changing for you and Luke.
The power of cinema, and you're right. There's so many of those stories, people coming up and saying, like, I just had no idea what you walked through. Because the film is very real to life. There was some adjusting on timelines and some subtle bits, but really all of the key moments are very much intact from what we lived in the 90s. And so it's been really marvelous to experience it, and also to honor our parents and the great sacrifice that they made in moving continents and their dreaming and their vision. And but yes, it's the power of cinema. I'm just in the bowels of an arena tonight in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and each night I've sort of mentioned, because this tour is under the namesake of the Unsung Hero Tour, and I'm playing a few songs from the soundtrack and whatnot, and I say to the audience each night, I just thank them for making it the #2 movie in America when it was released, and the whole arena explodes. And so you realize that, like, in a few short months, this went from no one ever having seen this film to millions of people now have experienced this story, and it's quite humbling. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I love that you keep saying the power of cinema. This is why I am so thankful that I get to do what I do. And I'm so thankful that there's so many people stepping into the ring, because there's power in cinema, and there's just as much power if it's something that is not as, Christ-centered as what you guys, are attempting to do. It's powerful. Anybody can use it.
The arts storyteller. Look, Jesus was a storyteller. Some would argue that the most ancient book ever written in the scriptures, which was Job, was a play. And so this idea of storytelling and music and rhythm, and like, this is written into our DNA. It's sort of the magic trick of God connecting with humanity. And so, yeah, you can harness it in a load of different ways, and sometimes it can be used for great things, and sometimes it can be used for really, treacherous things. And our hope is to take it very seriously and to use it to lift up this country and the people, and point us towards heaven, towards each other, and towards what it means to be human, to be loving and nonviolent and peaceful and joyful. And yeah.
Well, we are so thankful that you and the team and the family are continuing to do this. I mentioned, you said you're taking a break next year, but it's also so that you can focus it, ahead on
Yeah.
what's coming later too.
It
So
is
take a
funny
little
because,
rest. I do want you to do that, but then we need you to
yeah,
get to working again.
we will. It's funny because people have said that, kind of like, "Oh, you're taking a break next year." And I was like, "Well, okay, we're taking a break from touring, but we very much are eager to get back in the studio. I'm personally very excited to get back on the film set, work on another feature film, and so there's a lot of ground that we're hoping to cover creatively in 2025, and our hope is in 2026 you will see a for King Country 2.0 come back around, with a few guns blazing, so to speak. Yeah.
I am here for all of it. Congratulations again on the Christmas album coming out. Then it's coming to theaters as well. So, man, what a wonderful 2024 I think for King and Country has. And we are
Thank you.
so thankful for everything that you guys are doing. And again, we're just we're ready for what else is to come. So,
Thank you for having me, as always. And just to the viewers, if you made it this far, I should mention that cinematic experience is it's 5 nights only.
Yeah.
So it's December 5th through the 9th, and there's limited capacity. So I really want you to see it. Check your local listings. Go to fathom.com for kingcountry.com. And we'll see you in the cinemas. Merry Christmas, Carley.
Okay, now I want to introduce you to another rising Christian artist that you may not have heard about yet, but I think God is using her in big ways. Her name is Brooke Robertson. She's a self-proclaimed small-town raised Louisiana girl who is combining pop and country with some heartfelt lyrics. But before we hear more about her, let's go ahead and take a listen to one of her latest tracks called Hey God.
You're the one who gets me. You let me be just who I am. Even when I'm speechless, somehow you still understand. Hey God, I don't have the perfect words to say, but I know it doesn't matter if my words are beautiful or barely put together. You still wanna hear me
your album came out really kind of a couple years ago now, but because of the pandemic and COVID, I feel like it, like so many of you, it slowed things down. But from what I understand, though, you're like, you know what, God's got this, and His timing is what we want, anyways.
Yeah, so March was a hard time, I think, for everyone, especially in the music industry. And like I released my first, it was like my debut record. So it was exciting in March of 2020. And I was like excited and ready for just something new. And God really pushed me and challenged me to share my testimony, like a really deep secret that I kept on to for 15 years. And like God was healing me through it, had me write a song about it to release it to the world. And then boom, like it felt like a door slammed in my face. And I was just a little aggravated, like, okay, God, like you just had me share this story, my testimony. And now I feels like it was a door shut in the face. And really, it was a humbling moment for me. Looking back now, I'm like, He was teaching me that it was not about music. It was not about touring. It was not about the song. It was about the ministry behind it and why He put me there to share my story. Like he showed me that, hey, your story's going to touch people, and it's not always going to be from a stage. And so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for that lesson learned, and that He showed me that perspective. It took me a minute to get it, but He showed me that it was so much more, and it was a ministry. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. We opened with your latest song. We'll talk about both songs because so Hey God, though, which I think is just such an open and honest, you talk about storytelling. I think a lot of us can relate to that song. And tell me about kind of how you came to write that.
Yeah, so initially I wrote this song as just a conversation between me and God. It's how I start all of my prayers. I always start with, "Hey God," just because it's so personal. Like,
We don't need to
and
be all formal, right?
no,
Like,
and I don't have the fancy prayers, and sometimes it sounds like a mess. And I think that's the beautiful thing is like He's still listening, He's still leaning in. Like, what does my son or daughter have to say? In Psalm 116:2, it says that. Because He inclines His ear to me, therefore I will call upon Him for as long as I live. And like, it's just a beautiful picture of like the Lord literally leaning in, like when we talk to Him. And so that was my heart behind it. Well, a year later, it was a song that I would really need. And only God could have timed something like that. But that next year, my aunt, who was just my go-to, right? Like someone who, if I needed wisdom or prayer, she had a heart for ministry. And I just learned so much from her. Like, she ended up having a very sudden brain bleed, and it took our family by surprise. She was very healthy before, and it was one of those things where it was like 6 months of ups and downs and not really knowing what was going to happen. Doctors saying she was going to be okay, and then telling us that she had brain cancer and that there's nothing else that they could do, And so she went home to be with Jesus on March 16th of last year, which is such a God wink, and something that I get to hold on to, right? John 3:16, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. And so it's like, man, I have that hope that I get to see her again one day, And but it was hard. Like when I lost her here, I struggled because I prayed. I had more than a mustard seed of faith, and it may sound crazy to a lot of people, but I had faith that she'd be raised from the dead. Like, that is how much faith I had. And so I was confused whenever God didn't answer that prayer that she would be healed here. And I prayed for a miracle. She had so many people praying for her miracle here. And after I lost her, God was like, Brooke, she did get her miracle. She's with me. She's in heaven, and what a beautiful gift that is eternity with Him. And I get to see her again. But it's like natural, I think, for us in our human sense to pull away from the Lord when He doesn't answer a prayer the way that we want Him to. But there's something also beautiful about trusting Him even when He doesn't answer the way that we want Him to. And that next, 6 months, 8 months through the rest of that year, after losing her, it just brought me so close to the Lord. And it could have easily went the opposite way. And I'm so thankful that God showed me that He's still listening, and it just really was showing me the power of prayer, and that I could still pray the bold prayers, and like I went to Africa that summer and we were praying some bold prayers, like praying for healings and deliverances. And we were praying for us to hit water in places that they couldn't hit water. And like God was answering all of the prayers. And it was like, okay, He's wanting me to pray the bold prayers still. and trust that he's listening. And so, and I don't know, it was a beautiful journey for me, even though it was really hard. And so I'm thankful for that.
Talk about how music and this has been a ministry, for you as well, just for you personally, and then what your hope is for other people as well, because I just think
Yeah.
that's the coolest thing.
Yeah. So he was showing me, just the very beginning of this, that he's opened the doors for music for a reason. And I didn't quite understand that until years later, whenever he surfaced my testimony, that it was time for me to tell my story. And I remember back in 2019, just praying like, God, I don't understand why you have me here. You have me here in this music industry, but I feel so out of place. I feel like a fish out of water. And I remember one night I was praying like, God, it's time for me to write a record. Like, I was just signed to a label at the time, and I was like, God, what do these songs look like? If you have me here, what does this whole thing look like? And my testimony surfaced. And before, it's something that I could bury under the rug, pretend like it never happened. But this time it wouldn't leave me. And it was my story, my testimony. I was sexually abused at 10 years old, and I kept it quiet for 15 years. Promised myself that I would never talk about it. I promised myself that I would go to the grave with this story. And I carried guilt, shame. I felt dirty, alone, scared. And those are the reasons why I stayed silent. And the enemy used that to twist and manipulate my mind. And 15 years later, God opens the door for music, and he was like, it's time. It's time for you to share your story. It's time for you to let me heal you the way that you've never let me before. And he was just so gentle of a father to say, you have not forgiven the person who's sexually abused you. And I was like struggling and fighting with the Lord, because I was like, I've got to tell the world, but I've got to tell my family. And that was even more scary for me at the time. And so I, after praying and stuff like that, I was like, okay, what does this look like? And so I reached out to my abuser, and I was just like, this is where I'm at in life. I've got to write a song about what happened, but I want you to know that I forgive you and Jesus loves you. And I can remember the moment where I felt that lift from me, the unforgiveness. I felt light again. And I was like, oh, this is what it feels like, to be able to let that go. And I didn't even know how up until then, when it was just an act of faith.
Was it a daily thing for you? I've heard with forgiveness, when you really have something big to forgive somebody for, that sometimes it's not always just an easy, but it sounds like for you, it may have happened kind of quick, but a lot of times it is a choice that people have to make over and over again and until the feeling catches up.
I think too, like, it's a decision when you get to that place where you're like, I am no longer going to let this hold me down, and just to fully surrender that to the Lord. Because for 15 years, I'd convinced myself that I was okay and that I had forgiven. But the truth is, I was still believing the lies and the insecurities. I was still believing all of that, which means I hadn't truly let it go. And so when I got to that place where I was like, I am now ready to fully walk in freedom. And when I just decided to let that go and voice it out loud even, and it's not always to that person, I always tell everyone's story is different, but it's in your heart. And sometimes saying it out loud, is I feel like a slap to the devil, but it's just that decision, and it was immediate. But I will say, over the years, God has been like unlayering things through trauma. Like, hey, this is not me. This is from trauma. Like, let me heal that. And it's been 4 years of that, of just surfacing things coming up that I didn't even know were there. So it is still a daily thing, a daily die to ourselves. Like, God, is there something deep in me from trauma that I don't know about? Show me, what does that look like? I want you to heal me deep. And that's been my journey. So in a sense, yes, it's been a daily thing of me just asking the Lord, like, reveal stuff, get the junk out, that shouldn't be there.
But we all have that. And that's all a form of refining and what God does.
Yeah, I think too, the difference though, when you truly let it go, like, you don't hate that person anymore. You don't have so much bitterness and anger, it's more or less like, now I have this deep, like, compassion, and I hope that this person finds the Lord. It's just only from the Lord that I could feel that way.
How'd your family handle it? And because it's one thing to, it's a lot of hurt there, I'd imagine, on different levels.
Yeah, so I have a big family, and I didn't like gather them all up at one time, so I went from family member to family member separately and was telling my story. And God was showing me like how to tell my story through that season though, in a place of hope and not hurt. So telling my mom and my dad, I told them separately. My mom was very heartbroken. You know, obviously what parent wouldn't be. She tried to blame herself for it. You know, those things kind of surfaced. And I told her, I was like, it is not your fault. You know, they always taught me what was right and what's wrong. And like, I think like from that, I was scared to tell them because I was blaming myself, but I was telling them like I was in a situation where I couldn't get out of it, trying to get out of, and this is, I don't want to trigger anybody, but like just trying to get out of the situation and not being able to. And so I always I would reassure my mom, like it was not your fault. It was something that was completely out of my control. And telling my dad was a little harder because dads are protective. And I remember just talking to my dad and telling him like, this is what happened. But if it wasn't for you and mom bringing me to church as a kid and like giving me those roots, that groundedness that I had, I wouldn't be here. And so just reassuring like it's not y'all's fault. And later that day, my dad, when I told him, he was like, if you can forgive this person, then so can I. And I was like, that was huge for my dad to say that. And I was like, okay, God, what are you doing? You know, it's so much deeper, you know, telling my grandma and finding out that she's been abused by her father and struggling with unforgiveness. She's in her 80s, you know, and it was just like, okay, like this is way bigger than what I'd ever thought. And it's going to start with family, you know, healing in my family first. So, yeah. So, yeah.
And then, so what is this song? Because the song literally is taking your voice back and taking your story back, right?
Yeah. So and I feel like over the years, it's changed a little bit. Now I kind of come from it from a place where I want to challenge whoever's listening to it, you know, to say the names out loud of people who've done you wrong, because when you hold that in, when you hold the unforgiveness in, you're in bondage and you don't even realize it. I was in it for so long and I thought that was normal, but really it's heavy and it's not normal. And like God took that, he sent his son, Jesus, to die on the cross so that we wouldn't have to carry that. And until I realized that, I was walking in that bondage. But I've been able to go out and share my testimony and hear people say like, today I forgave my abuser. Today I'm going to tell my mom that I was abused. Like just taking that next step forward in healing. And it's not always like a night and day, but it's that next step, that little step forward that matters. And that sometimes that's the hardest one. But once you take that, it's like he's walking you like a lamp unto my feet, right? He's showing you like, all right, this is your next step in healing. And just letting him journey with you through that healing.
Oh, I cannot wait to see where God continues to take her career. If you would like to follow along with her on her journey and keep up to date on her tour dates and future projects, just go to her website, which is BrookeRobertsonMusic.com. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Carley Boyette, and I look forward to seeing you next week right here on your Christian Television Network.